I've been driving a cab in New York for 22 years, and I've learned to recognize stories just by the way people get into the car. On that rainy night, Cyndi Lauper climbed in carrying an old suitcase covered in stickers from cities all over the world, her eyes tired but shining with a recent victory. She took a deep breath, and that unmistakable Queen's accent echoed when she told me her destination. There was something extraordinary hanging off that woman, something I only saw in people who had walked through fire and come out whole on the other side. During that ride, she told me how she came from a childhood where being different was seen as being broken, how she was rejected hundreds of times, loved someone who tried to erase her, and reached an abyss so deep she considered giving up, only to discover that the most revolutionary thing she could do was simply be herself. It wasn't a story about luck. It was the story of someone who looked at the worst-case scenario and decided none of it had the power to kill who she was on the inside. Within the first block, she broke the silence the way people with a story to tell always do, abruptly, as if she'd been rehearsing that account all night long. She looked out at the rain-slicked street, and her body seemed to relax a little when she started to speak. You know, I grew up in a family where being different was, well, it was like being broken, Cyndi said, and her voice took on that low tone of someone revealing secrets kept for a long time. She said her mother was a traditional woman, from that era when daughters were supposed to be silent, obedient, and too small to be heard. Her father worried too much about what the neighbors thought, like the kind of guy who saw life as a game of reputation. And her? Since she was a kid, Cyndi was loud, out of control, different. She described that childhood in Queens as living in a glass house, with everyone watching, judging, saying all the time, sit up straight, speak softer. Why can't you be like the other girls? Her parents wanted her, sure they did, but there was always that but at the end of every sentence. Always that invisible tone that said you'd be perfect if you were just less you. Cyndi had hair that wouldn't fit into any mold, an energy that scared people, and a laugh that was considered inappropriate for a nice girl from a family. It was like trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. The more you forced it, the more the damage increased. I slowed down in the heavy traffic and turned a bit toward her. Cyndi, that emptiness you felt at home, that was the first sign you needed something different. Not everyone hears that calling, I said. She looked at me and nodded, like someone finally finding a person who understands. When I discovered that I liked music, performance, shining, she continued, and something changed in her voice, it gained a lightness, as if she were remembering the first ray of sun after cloudy days. It was like finally discovering where I fit. On stage, I wasn't strange. I was necessary. That was what she had been searching for her whole life, without knowing she was looking for it. A place where the characteristics seen as defects at home were transformed into superpowers. On stage, that uncontrolled energy turned into magnetism, that weird hair became style, that inappropriate laugh became freedom. She started leaving the house for school performances, for shows in small bars, for any place that would let her be herself inside a spotlight. But there was a problem she didn't see clearly yet at that moment. The world out there wasn't a safe Queens, but it wasn't a stage either. It was something much more complex, much more cruel. There was an abyss between being different in a conservative family and trying to sell that difference as art in a market that had very well-defined rules. I had this ridiculous certainty, she said, smiling slightly for the first time, that if I was talented enough, if I worked hard enough, the doors would open. It seems naive now, but back then it was all I had to hold on to. I listened intently because I knew that naive certainty was about to be tested in a way she never imagined. Something back then was starting to change for her, not dramatically, but like a coin rolling on a table that you don't notice until it falls. She was about to find out that having talent and being different weren't guaranteed blessings. They were just the starting point for a war she didn't even know was beginning. "Do you want to know when things got serious?" she asked. And I felt we were getting to the point where the story gained real weight. Cyndi shifted in the back seat and continued speaking more softly, as if the years had literally lowered her volume. "I had dreams when I was young, big dreams, like the kind that seem obvious when you're 20 years old and have innocence in abundance. she said, staring out the taxi window. She said that back then, the music industry was different, much more closed off. If you didn't have the right look, the right voice, or fit into a very specific box they had drawn, you heard the same no hundreds of times. Record executives passed on her demos without even listening. Agents said she looked too peculiar for pop, as if being peculiar was a disease. Producers suggested she tone everything down, her clothes, her personality, even her accent. I tried, Cyndi admitted, and there was weight in that confession, the weight of someone who has already gone through the humiliation of trying to be someone they weren't. I tried to be who they wanted me to be. I wore clothes that weren't mine, clothes that made me feel like a doll. I sang in a way that made my throat actually hurt, like real physical pain. And you know what the result was? The same nose. She paused deliberately, letting that sink in. Because you can't fake authenticity. People sense when you're lying about who you are. It's like that animal instinct. They know you're prey before you even open your mouth. I understood exactly what she was describing. I went through that every day, people getting into my cab trying to be who they weren't, and the exhaustion of it was visible in the way they breathed. There was a time, she said, when making a living singing seemed as impossible as flying to the moon without a rocket. She had considered giving up completely, not dramatically, not like someone contemplating suicide. It was subtler than that. It was the idea of going back home, getting a normal job in an office, marrying a regular guy her parents approved of, living the life her parents always wanted her to live. She even had a name for it in her head, dying while alive. There is a specific moment I remember, she said, and her voice got even lower, where I was lying in bed in a room I shared with 3 other girls in the dark, and I thought, that's it, give up, get an admin gig, be happy with the minimum. I turned a bit in my seat and said, Cyndi, that moment when you thought about giving up was the most important moment of your life, because that's where you find out if you want to be here or if you want to be okay, and there is a difference. The taxi went through a red light, and in that silence, she took a deep breath like someone recalling exactly what that turning point was like. I woke up the next day, she continued, and my first thought was, if you give up now, you will never know. It was a simple phrase, but it had the weight of a death sentence or a resurrection, depending on how you chose to interpret it. That phrase kept her awake. That phrase made her call more record labels. That phrase became fuel. She breathed deeply and continued telling the story, and I felt like we were entering an even darker phase of the tale. The problem wasn't just the industry, she said, and now there was a hardness in her voice that wasn't there before, a hardness that came from years of accumulated pressure. The problem was that I believed what everyone said. Cyndi described those 20-something years as a series of slow deaths, in slow motion, like those movies where you see the victim drowning in slow motion and can't do anything to stop it. Every rejection was a blow. Every time someone said you aren't pretty enough, she believed it. Every time a producer said your voice is too particular, she internally heard your voice is wrong. She started going to the mirror and looking at herself with their eyes, seeing defects where before there was character, seeing something broken, not something unique. I tried to fix it, she continued, and there was a sadness in that admission that was almost unbearable. I went on crazy diets like diets no respectable doctor would recommend. I spent money I didn't have on procedures I didn't need. I changed my hair, my clothes, the way I walked, even the way I laughed. She paused and looked at her own hands. And every change was a little piece of me disappearing. It was like I was erasing myself brushstroke by brushstroke, slowly, hoping that when I finished, someone would finally say, okay, you're good enough now. During this period, she met a guy who worked in the industry, well-connected, successful, with that security of someone who never needed to doubt himself. He persuaded her that if she followed him, he would take her to the top. And she, desperate, believed him. But following him meant surrendering completely, she said, and her voice took on a quality that was almost mechanical, like someone who has told this story so many times they learned to tell it without crying. It meant him controlling every detail, who I knew, what clothes I wore, who I spoke to, what thoughts I was allowed to have. When she questioned something, he used that weapon men like him always used, the weapon of fake benevolence. I am trying to help you. If you don't trust me, you are ungrateful. It was manipulation disguised as care. It was control sold as protection. The taxi turned onto an emptier street, and it seemed appropriate. This part of the story needed space to breathe, needed silence. I was being suffocated, Cyndi said simply, like someone finally saying out loud what she always knew but never pronounced. And the worst part is that nobody saw it. My family thought it was good. My friends thought I was lucky. And me, I was dying slowly, and nobody heard the scream. I took a deep breath, let the car roll in silence for a few seconds, and then spoke. Cyndi, that guy, he didn't want to help you shine. He wanted to make you shine in a way that made him look good, because that way you would be a reflection of him, and not yourself. She nodded, as if she had waited decades to hear someone say that out loud, as if those words finally gave her permission to name what she lived through as a prison. Cyndi stayed silent for a few seconds. Outside the taxi, the city continued its life, indifferent. But inside there, we were somewhere different, in a dark place where words weighed more. There is a moment, she began slowly, choosing every word like someone walking on a tightrope, when you aren't dying slowly anymore. You are dead, and you keep breathing, but it is just out of habit. She said one day she woke up in that guy's bed and simply did not recognize the woman in the mirror. Her eyes had disappeared. The person there was a shell, an empty husk, a wrapper that used to contain someone who was alive. That woman was like a well-dressed zombie. She functioned, but didn't exist. That morning, something inside her turned, like a key locking a door that would never open the same way again. He said I had an audition at a record label that day, Cyndi continued, and her voice got even lower. One more chance, one more empty hope, one more place where I would be rewritten, reformatted, corrected. She was there, ready to go, wearing makeup the way he liked, dressed the way he approved, with her hair the way he preferred, when her makeup mirror, literally her mirror, fell and broke into pieces on the floor. She described this moment as a sign, although not in a religious way. It was more like the universe saying, look, do you see? It broke, just like you are breaking. 7 years bad luck, superstitions say. But for her, it was 7 years of good luck beginning. He saw me there, sitting, looking at the pieces of broken mirror scattered on the floor, she said. And he did what men like him always do when you stop being useful. He looked at me with pure contempt, like the contempt of someone looking at an object that finally lost its functionality. In that instant, Cyndi felt something very important happening inside her. It wasn't anger. Anger was too energetic for that tired body. It was something colder, clearer, more crystalline, pure clarity. The clarity that she had been so busy trying to be what everyone wanted her to be, that she had completely forgotten why she wanted to be alive in the first place. And that clarity was like a match lighting up in a dark room. I slowed down intentionally, let the silence breathe, and then spoke to the back seat. Cyndi, when you see someone looking at you that way, you are looking into a mirror of who you do not want to be. And that is a gift, even if it seems like a curse. She closed her eyes and breathed, that type of breath that is almost a sigh of relief, and then continued telling the story. I left there that day, Cyndi said, and there was something different in her voice now, a small lightness, as if just speaking these words was liberating, and I didn't go back, not to get clothes, not for a goodbye conversation, not for anything. I simply left. She described the following weeks as being in a kind of strange void, that void that is both terrifying and cozy at the same time. No money, no secure job, no safety net, nothing but a backpack, and the question that had been running underneath everything for years, who am I really when nobody is looking? When there is no camera, no stage, no audience expecting something from me? I went to a friend's house who had offered me help in the past, she continued. And for the first time in years, and I mean literally decades, I didn't try to be anything for anyone. I just existed. Cyndi described those strange days as finally being alone without being lonely. She slept, ate simple food, breathed air she didn't have to hold in. No performance, no self-supervision, no guilt. During those days, she put on headphones, not to rehearse, not to improve, not to impress anyone, just to listen to music like a normal human being listens to music. And she heard a song she had never heard before in the way she heard it in that moment, and a small, tiny, almost invisible idea began to grow inside her like a seed. "What if I just sang for myself?" she whispered to that friend in a moment of vulnerability. "What if I created something that was so radically me that no one had the power to ask me to change?" The friend looked at her as if Cyndi had said something revolutionary, because it had been. "I don't want to be a pop star," she continued, and now her voice had that tone of someone finally discovering the truth. "If being a pop star means not being myself, so what if I created something that was so radically me that the very act of trying to change me would be asking me to be another person completely?" It was in that moment that the idea for the song began, not as a calculated commercial strategy, but as an act of pure rebellion, as a personal manifesto, as a silent declaration of war against all the people who had tried to make her small, erased, invisible. I turned and looked into her eyes in the rearview mirror, and for a moment we both understood that something important was happening. "Cyndi, that moment, when you stopped singing for them and started singing for you, was exactly the moment you started singing for the world. Because the world always wants what is genuine, always. Not because it is smart, but because every tired person, every fake person, every person who died while alive recognizes the truth when they hear it." She smiled. It wasn't that tired smile she had shown at the beginning of the ride. It was a real smile. The song started as a joke, Cyndi recalled, and there was lightness returning to her voice now, that tone of someone finally able to tell about something that doesn't hurt anymore. "It literally started because my friend was watching a video of girls dancing, and I said, 'Well, girls just want to have fun.' And she laughed, and I thought, what if we made a song that was exactly about that?" She described how, for the first time in years, she was creating without permission, without a man in the background saying if it was commercial enough, without an executive judging every note, without that paralyzing fear of not being enough. The music was simple, but it was radically honest. It had a joy that was contagious. Not that fake joy of someone pretending to be okay, but the legitimate joy of someone who discovered they can breathe again. "I made that song with a producer who was a friend of my friend," she continued. "No pressure, no expectation. No one saying this is going to be a hit or this is going to flop. Just two people doing something because it was fun, because it was necessary, because it was true." When they finished, Cyndi had a strange feeling. That feeling you get when you know you did something important, even when nobody else knows yet. It was like finding a key you didn't even know you were looking for. She started singing this song in small bars, in shared studios, anywhere that would let her. And something magical started to happen. Not overnight, but progressively. People started coming back. Not because it was well-produced or commercial or because it followed the formulas the industry determined, but because it was true. I turned a bit in my seat while she described this, and I could see in the reflection of the mirror how her body changed posture, became more relaxed, more present. "There is a video that circulated back then," she said, "of me in a small bar singing that song, and I was completely, radically, dangerously myself. Weird hair, weird clothes, weird way of dancing and moving on stage. Everything the industry had said was a no. It was all there in that video, as if I were spitting in their faces saying, 'I see you, and I refuse.' The people watching that video didn't see imperfection. They saw freedom. They saw what they themselves would like to have, the courage to be exactly who they are without excuses." I took a deep breath and spoke. "Cyndi, when you stopped hiding who you were, you stopped competing against billions of other people who are trying to be exactly the same thing. You started competing against no one, because no one, literally no one in the universe is you." She looked at me with those eyes that now had the shine of someone who finally understood something fundamental about human existence. And I knew we were reaching the point where the story gained scale, where a personal life became a movement. "After that video, things started to change," Cyndi said, and now there was a different quality in her voice. Less pure survival narrative, more conscious strategy narrative. But it wasn't the change I expected. The labels started calling again, but now it was different. Now they didn't want a polished and domesticated version of Cyndi. They wanted the real Cyndi. They knew there was something there they couldn't replicate. There was energy. There was authenticity. There was that quality you can't buy or manufacture. It was truth. The first thing I did was say no to all of them, she continued, and I felt their pressure like a hand squeezing my neck. Cyndi, you will never get another chance like this. You are 24 years old. The window is closing. You are committing professional suicide. There was desperation in their voices because suddenly she had what they wanted and she was refusing. She had inverted the power. She wasn't the desperate girl begging for an opportunity anymore. She was the girl with something they had to have. Cyndi wasn't in a position to beg anymore. She was in a position to negotiate. She made a dramatic pause, and I felt the change of tone happening in real time inside the taxi. Do you know what I said to them? She asked. I said, if this window closes because I refuse to be rewritten, then that's not the window I want. Those words echoed inside the car, and they had the weight of a personal revolution. Cyndi described a meeting she had with a different producer, a guy who, when he saw her, didn't try to correct her or fix her or transform her. Instead, he asked, "What do you want to do?" Just that. He asked. He didn't say. He asked. For Cyndi, that simple question was revolutionary because nobody had asked before. That producer said, "Cyndi, you have something most artists spend their whole lives looking for. You are uncopiable. Let's build a label around that, not reduce it. Let's amplify that." Those words, she said, were the words that killed the voice inside her that still believed there was something fundamentally wrong with her. I turned in my seat and spoke with a clarity that even surprised me, Cyndi. When you find people who see you, not as a project to fix, not as a product to sell, but as a complete person, those are the people in whose company you grow. And the rest of your life is learning to recognize those people quickly. She nodded slowly, processing not just my words, but the whole journey that had led her to that understanding. The song was released in 1984, Cyndi continued, and there was a quality of contained victory in her voice, not arrogance, but the satisfaction of someone who finally saw her work reach the world. And something absolutely crazy happened. She described how the music started small, on college radio stations, on MTV programs back when MTV was still about music. But it wasn't the song that was famous in the beginning. It was the video. A video where she danced, wearing clothes that were completely outside the standards of the time, with even more bizarre hair, surrounded by people of different ages, genders, ethnicities, all celebrating this simple and radical right, just wanting to have fun. Men didn't want to have fun at the time, Cyndi explained. Men wanted to be serious. They wanted to be powerful. They wanted to dominate. Women wanted to be, well, they wanted to be exactly what men wanted them to be. Small, obedient, decorative. But that video, that song, was revolutionary because it was so radically simple. You deserved to have fun. That was everything. There was no complex politics, no hidden agenda. Just the affirmation that you deserved joy. The song started to climb the charts. But it wasn't a normal rise for a good song. It was an explosion. The kind of explosion that happens when you touch a collective nerve nobody knew existed. As the song exploded, Cyndi described something strange and wonderful happening. People started telling stories about what that song meant to them. A woman stopped me on the street and said, "That song saved me when I was trapped in a bad marriage. It reminded me that I had the right to feel joy." Another said, "It gave me the courage to come out of the closet and own my sexuality without guilt." A boy wrote to say, "You made me realize that being weird wasn't a problem to be corrected. It was my superpower." The song had become an anthem, not because it was planned that way, but because it was true. And the truth has this strange power to find the people who need it. And you know the funniest part? Cyndi asked with a sarcastic lightness that I loved. All those labels that told me I was non-commercial, a non-winner, non-something, all of them wanted my catalog all of a sudden. All of them wanted to be associated with me now. I genuinely laughed, because the irony was delicious. "Cyndi, you didn't change," I said. "They changed. And the reason they changed is because you had the courage to stay exactly the same when the whole world was screaming for you to change. That is the lesson most people never learn. But here is the part nobody talks about, Cyndi continued, and there was a seriousness in her voice that wasn't there before, a seriousness that came from understanding difficult truths about success. Success doesn't solve anything. It just changes the type of problem you have. She described how, now that she was famous, there was different pressure. Pressure to stay relevant. Pressure to repeat the formula that worked. Pressure from fans who wanted her to stay frozen in that moment of 1984 forever. As if she could stop aging, stop evolving, stop being human. There were executives now saying, "Cyndi, don't change. Keep being the girls just want to have fun, girl forever." That is what the public wants. And I realized it was exactly the same prison, just with more money, a bigger audience, and a bigger illusion of freedom. Cyndi described how she did something not many artists do. She evolved deliberately. She released completely different albums. She experimented with different genres. Some worked commercially, others were financial failures. But everything she did was honest to who she was in that moment. "I recorded a completely different album after She's So Unusual," she said. An album that was introspective, melancholic, experimental. And the industry said, "Cyndi, you are suicidal. You are killing your career. You are burning the goodwill capital you had." She paused and smiled in that way you smile when you remember making the right decision despite the world saying it was wrong. And I said, "Maybe, but I am killing what needs to die so that I can live. If that is my career, then it isn't worth living for." Cyndi described a whole decade of building a career that was integrally her own. She made the choices, not a manager, not a label, not the collective opinion of millions of fans. She decided how she looked, how she expressed herself, what risks she took, and some of those choices made her disappear from the spotlight for a while. "But I was still there," she said, and there was peace in those words. Making art, making music, making television, doing things that genuinely interested me. And you know what I discovered? The world didn't forget me. It just left me in peace while I recharged my battery. I turned and spoke. "Cyndi, you did something almost no one manages to do. You refused to be a quick consumption product. You insisted on being a whole life, complete, complex, in constant evolution." She nodded, and in that moment I could see we were getting close to the end of the story. But the most important part was still missing. Cyndi's voice changed when she reached this part of the story. It got lower, heavier, like someone preparing to descend into the depths. "But there is more to the story," she said simply. "Because success doesn't mean the demons disappear. It just means you have more resources to deal with them." She said that years later, during the 1990s, she faced something nobody saw coming: serious health problems, complicated family problems, personal problems so deep that success had served as a blanket covering everything, but solving nothing. "I had told my family years ago that I would refuse to be small," she continued. "But refusing to be small for the industry is one thing. Refusing to be small inside your own family, especially when you become famous and your family can't understand how you became this weird person they always feared you would be, is something completely different." Cyndi described a confrontation with her father that had been building for decades. A confrontation where everything that had been said with silence, everything that had been implied in disapproving looks, everything that had been repressed during a whole life of family tension, finally exploded. He told me, "You turned into exactly what your parents tried to avoid. You turned into an exhibitionist, a person who doesn't respect the rules, a disappointment to this family." There was pain in that sentence, but it wasn't the pain of someone being unfair. It was the pain of someone finally being honest about what they felt. And I simply looked at him, right in the eyes, without blinking, and said, "Dad, what you called exhibitionism is self-expression. What you called a lack of respect for rules is bravery. And what you called a disappointment is the fact that I refused to live the life you would like me to live." There was a quality of confrontation in that conversation that changed everything. It wasn't violent. It wasn't revenge. It was just the truth, finally being spoken out loud. And after that conversation, my father, he finally started to understand. Not everything, but enough. The taxi passed through a quieter region of the city, and in the silence that followed, I turned and spoke. Cyndi, that was the real victory. It wasn't conquering the music industry. It wasn't selling millions of records. It was conquering the permission from yourself to be who you were, even when those who raised you would never completely understand. She had tears in her eyes now, but they were tears of liberation, not pain. There is one last thing I never told anyone, Cyndi said, and her voice got even quieter, like someone trusting a sacred secret. And it is the reason I am telling you now. She described a period, years after all the success, when everything seemed to be falling to pieces. The industry had discarded her as the past, that cruel way the entertainment world discards women when they age. Her personal life was chaos. And then came the diagnosis that would change everything. Cancer, she said simply, and that word alone seemed to occupy all the space in the taxi. A word that changes everything. A word that puts everything in perspective. Cyndi told how, when you are looking death in the eyes, all other things disappear like fog at dawn. All those things you were worried about achieving, possessing, being recognized for, none of that matters when you are in a hospital bed having chemotherapy, losing the hair you spent your whole life trying to define your identity with. I was lying in a hospital bed, she continued, and I could imagine exactly the scene. Those cold rooms, those machines beeping, that loneliness that is specific to hospitals. And there was a moment where I thought, well, here it is. Here is the end of the story I feared. She paused, took a deep breath, and then asked, "And do you know what my first thought was when I started to accept that I might die?" I waited, because I knew this was important, the kind of thing that changes a life. My first thought was, at least I lived. At least I was myself while I was here. At least I didn't spend my whole life pretending to be someone I wasn't. That was enough. That was always enough. Cyndi described how in that moment, facing the real possibility of death, she realized that the fear she had carried for so long, the fear of being judged, of being rejected, of not being enough, was small, tiny, compared to the joy of having lived authentically. I survived, she said. And when I survived, I didn't go back to being who I was. Because that person, the Cyndi who had survived just pretending, just trying to please, had died in the hospital along with those cancer cells. There was transformation in those words. Who walked out of the hospital was someone new, someone who didn't have patience for small behaviors, for social lies, for toxic dynamics anymore. I turned and met her eyes in the rearview mirror. Cyndi, when you look death in the eyes like you did, it teaches you only one true thing. Never live as if you aren't worthy. Because every second you deny yourself, you are committing suicide in slow motion. There was absolute silence in the taxi now. Just the rain hitting the glass, as if it had come just to hear this story. And that is what brings me here, in this taxi. Tonight, Cyndi said, and adjusted her posture in the seat. She seemed different now, transformed. It was as if all these years, all these stories she had told during that ride, had come out of her and left space for something new to breathe. She looked at the document she had been holding during the whole conversation, the contract I had seen when she got into the taxi. I am signing a deal to tell my story completely. Not the version the industry wants, not the summarized version fans might like, the real version, with all the ugly parts, all the beautiful parts, all the emptiness, and all the joy. Cyndi described how this meant being vulnerable again, vulnerable in a way that is different, deeper. It meant allowing people who had hurt her to understand exactly how they had hurt her. It meant being responsible for her own mistakes too, for her own weaknesses, for her own moments when she wasn't heroic. But you know what? She continued, and there was a peace in her voice that you only hear in people who have finally made peace with their own stories. I'm ready, because I discovered that telling the truth is much scarier than living it. And if I manage to live all that, all those years of conflict and discovery and death and resurrection, I can tell it too. We reached her destination, a quiet street in New York, far from the chaos of Manhattan, closer to the root of everything. She picked up her belongings with care, looked at me in the rearview mirror and smiled, that real smile I had seen born during the conversation. "Thank you for listening," she said. "Thank you for asking how it was. Thank you for not trying to fix my story or make it inspiring in an easy way." I nodded because I had understood something important during that ride, that sometimes the greatest respect you can offer someone is just listening to the truth they are sharing without trying to turn it into something it isn't. She got out of the taxi with the old suitcase full of stickers, with that shirt that had the MTV logo, with that hair that still defied convention. She closed the door gently, not like someone in a rush, but like someone who knows she is leaving something important behind in that car. She waved goodbye, that gesture of someone who knows well the feeling of having to go, of having to continue, of having to live. I sat there for a few more minutes, with the engine still running, processing everything I had just heard. In 22 years driving a cab, I hear stories of people in debt, heartbroken people, people who made the wrong decision and are now living the consequences. But there was something different in that story. It wasn't a story of luck. It wasn't a story of someone born with advantages. It was the story of someone who looked at the worst-case scenario: rejection, misunderstanding, abuse, even confrontation with death, and decided that none of those scenarios had the power to kill who she was on the inside. The truth always wins, I thought. Not because it is convenient, but because it is true. So now I ask you, and I want you to really think about this. What part of you that the world said was wrong is actually your greatest strength? What rejection have you transformed into fuel? What no from the past seems ridiculous now when you look at who you have become? Because that is the truth Cyndi lived. It wasn't about beating the industry. It was about beating herself, about beating the voice of the father who said she was too small, of the guy who tried to control her, of the executives who said she wasn't commercial. If this story touched you, and please leave a comment if it did, click that like button. If you know someone who needs to hear that being different isn't a defect but a superpower, share this video with that person right now. And if you want to keep learning about real people who did extraordinary things because they refused to believe the no's the world screamed, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any taxi rides. Because every week there are stories here that change how you understand life, courage, and the meaning of being truly free. See you on the next ride.